Hey folks, welcome back to the dev stream. My name is Nick Taylor, aka Hulk Hogan today. Welcome back to the dev stream.
Hi,
My
Hulk.
name is Nick Taylor. All right, sorry, I'm having some serious mustache issues here. As I was saying, my name is Nick Taylor. I'm a senior software engineer here at Forem. Forem is the software that powers dev. As always, I'm here with my awesome co-host, Christina Gorton. Christina, you want to just give a little kind of intro to yourself, and then we'll get to our guest.
Yeah, I'm Christina Gorton. I'm the open source community manager at Forem, and that's really all you need to know about me. Let's talk about Levi.
Cool. Who is this Levi? We're here today with our awesome coworker Levi Sharpe. I'm trying to remember what your exact title is. Is it head podcast engineer or production quality master or Sir Mix-a-Lot?
Audio guru, wizard,
Yeah,
senior podcast producer,
that
and
was it. I was close.
sound designer. Yeah.
Cool. So
Um,
I'm gonna take this
yeah.
off. It's not staying on. So Levi's on the show today. As he mentioned, he helps. You manage a few podcasts. I know, like you do. I don't know all of them. I know you did Dev Discuss, Code Newbies. Am I missing one? I know.
Dev News.
Yeah, Dev News.
So yeah, I edit, produce, and engineer Code Newbie, Dev Discuss, and Dev News. And the reason we're doing this stream on Friday is because Dev News launched this week, and I have to put that thing together all on Wednesday. We record Wednesday morning. It has to come out Thursday morning. So there was no possible way I would have any time to do this.
Cool.
So sorry, audience members, for forcing you to change.
Which reminds me, this is Walkthrough Wednesdays, Friday edition. Yeah, exactly. So TGIF.
Hashtag Levi ruins everything.
So one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on here is, well, one, it was kind of like we were talking a bit first. I'm kind of curious because I have some questions. I started streaming in April. I know since the pandemic, like a lot of folks are stuck in their houses. More people are streaming, or potentially, I know a few people that started podcasts. So I thought it'd be, well, great for a few reasons. One, to really understand kind of what it takes to make a podcast. Also, like, because I know it's not just like, yeah, record it and let's ship it. There's a ton of work that goes into it. I know. I just don't know what all that work is, but I do know there is. And the other thing too, yeah, it's just maybe there's some tips we can give to folks who might have just started on their audio file journey / podcast / stream. I don't know. So
Totally. Before we get into that, can I tell you a funny story about Hulk Hogan?
yes. You can.
Okay. It is podcast related. So prior to working here, one of the places I worked and one of the places that I was also helping to build their podcast unit was Gizmodo Media.
Okay.
And Gizmodo Media is a media company that's like a big umbrella of brands and blogs, things like Jezebel and Lifehacker, Kotaku, those places.
Okay.
And before it was Gizmodo Media, it was actually Gawker Media.
Okay.
If for those of you who don't know Gawker Media, Gawker was also a blog, and they had a legal spat with Hulk Hogan.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Who then was financially backed by Peter Thiel, who they also had some bad blood between. Long story short, Peter Thiel, or Hulk Hogan, powered by Peter Thiel, smashed Gawker Media. It turns into Gizmodo Media. Gizmodo Media is acquired by Fusion, which is owned by Univision.
Okay.
When that happened, they also decided that they wanted podcasts for all their different blogs.
Okay.
And that's when, the new Fusion / Gizmodo Media put out the call for a podcast producer and to have their, to launch a podcast unit. So I kind of owe a bit of my career to Hulk Hogan in a way. If you trace it back
Nice.
all the way.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. And he always had some wise words. I think it's take your vitamins and something about like taking care of the pythons and I forget what I didn't wear I was gonna wear a tank top, but it's like kind of starting to get cold in Montreal. So like even though my house is heated, but I was contemplating doing one of the shirt tears.
Oh man. I was always an Austin 316 kid because
Okay.
316 is my birthday. So
Okay.
Nice.
You know.
Even better.
Well, say,
I didn't have a costume, but I'm gonna say that I'm just like a, tired, stressed out mom or something, because that's like my life. So that's my costume.
Ooh, Brett, making
see
Halloween
that
real.
I'm tired.
Wow. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah.
All right. Well,
Now we
yeah.
have questions for
Yeah.
Levi. So this is what we're going to do. If you're in the chat and you have a question, you can put it in the chat and we'll be checking that out and taking those questions as well. If you don't, we have questions, which I'm going to drop a link real quick from an AMA that we had posted on Dev. And that's where we're going to start asking questions. So Nick, do you want me to ask the questions this time? Do you want to ask the questions? How do you want to go about this?
I guess you can start. I guess maybe we could alternate or.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So I see that Rafi is in the chat and he actually had a question on the AMA. So his question, Levi, was any suggestions for someone who wants to start podcasting? Do you have any general suggestions or anything that you can kind of put out there for just someone wanting to start?
My first and probably most important suggestion is to listen to everything that I've ever made or done. So once you've done that,
Yeah, there we go.
I mean, honestly, like, I would just look up like, decent mics in your budget. I wrote something for Lifehacker once that was sort of like a walkthrough of like some equipment and some things to like, for people to think about starting podcasting. I mean, obviously, like, if you're really low on a budget, like you can even record yourself on your smartphone and sync up the audio later, which is a hassle. But sometimes, if you don't have the money, your smartphone might be the best microphone that you have.
Yeah.
Other than that, there are other good budget options. You have like, the Blue Yeti is decent, or the Blue Snowball. Although like you want to like become familiar a little bit with like these microphones and like how they capture audio, because like something like the Blue Snowball captures in a really wide range, so you're going to pick up a lot of like sound,
Okay.
like ambient sound, like around your house, just because it is like picking up in like a very wide like circle around it. Something like what I'm using now is a Shure Beta 87. This is one of my favorite mics. It sounds great. Two, it records in sort of like a heart shape, so like
Okay.
it's good for like back and forth interviews if you're like interviewing somebody in front of you and you're like using one microphone, and it just doesn't like, it won't pick up as much sound as like from your house ambient sound. The other thing is like, other than equipment, I just like think people need to like, I think that there's like an idea, and maybe this comes from like YouTube generation, that's like, it doesn't matter the quality of a thing as long as you're putting it out. I do not subscribe to that whatsoever. I think like, no matter how brilliant you think you are or sound or have things to say, like there's very, very cost-effective ways of like giving yourself like semi-professional like sounding production quality. Outside of that, like, thinking about a podcast like editorially, like there's a billion podcasts out there, and the one thing I would ask even before like putting like mouth to a mic is like, why? Like,
Yeah.
why should this exist? And like as a journalist, that's like the thing we ask ourselves all the time. It's like, if we're going to cover a story, why? Why is it newsworthy? Why should people care? And, just why should it exist at all? So that's the main
Yeah.
thing, I would say. Editorially, why should it exist? What are you bringing that isn't already out there? And two, like, just look into some decent equipment.
I
Yeah.
can definitely agree with that. Like Christina said, she's got the Blue Yeti. I bought one because I asked a few people and they seem to say like that's like a pretty good standard one to start with, and I just got it and I noticed a difference in quality of the way I sound immediately. Like I mean I use it for our Zoom calls or like meetings too now, but like I noticed like a huge difference from like my Mac internal microphone to this. Like
Yeah.
but
I
I do,
mean,
yeah.
the thing, like, so our whole company is like remote, right? And even like Code Newbie, also a remote company even before it was acquired by Dev/Forem.
Yeah.
And, so a lot of the guests that we have on, like, I'm having like, uh, you know, while I'm booking guests, I'm like, okay, what microphones do you have around you? Like trying to like find what's around them that might be like the best quality and that I might be able to engineer and sound a little bit better later.
Okay.
Sometimes the best thing that a lot of people have are like the new MacBook Pros have really good microphones in them. However, most of the time it's going to make you sound super echoey because it's
Okay.
similar to that like snowball where it's picking up audio from such a large range. And so it's going to pick you up like bounce, like your voice bouncing off your unsound treated walls,
Okay.
So like it's a, a good microphone, it's going to make you sound more crisp, it might mitigate some of like issues with like if you don't have like, you know, sound treated studio walls or something, it might make that sound a little bit better, you know.
Yeah.
I
Because
give
we all,
people a little bit of, yeah.
I
Go
was gonna
on.
say because we all have sound treated walls, right?
Exactly. Yes. Um, and yeah, and there are certain like plugins and things that I use to mitigate some of that, but nothing beats just recording it in as good a quality like from the start. Like
Okay.
fixing things in post, you're always like picking poisons essentially.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
since you were talking about microphones, I do have questions about this because like from a hardware standpoint, uh, I'm not an audiophile. To give you a perfect example, the radio in my car stopped working at one point.
Audiophile like this.
Yeah. I think I told this in one of our all hands one time, but I used to have a Volkswagen Jetta. The car stereo stopped working. I eventually got one, but for about 2 months, this was when Walkman still existed, or I had a Discman. But I was driving around with the headphones around my neck to hear my music in my car, and I was like, yeah, it's okay, I guess, And I know I know that's not the case because I've met a few folks who really do care about sound, including yourself, and I feel like they'd all be like, and
There's just so many things out there. Like it's funny because like my girlfriend will listen to music just like through the smartphone speakers.
I do that too. It drives my husband crazy.
We have a bunch of like good Bluetooth speakers. We have a sound bar
okay.
next to her workstation that's like a very good sound bar. And all you
Yeah.
have to do is yell at it to play
Yeah, I
Spotify
get
and it'll
this
do
all the
it for you. So
We do have a question real quick in the chat that's kind of going along with this, so I wanted to ask it. They said, I get that these are specialized mics and they're probably the best to do it on, but have you ever recorded a podcast or something like that on a gaming headset? Sorry, a gaming headset like Corsair or Steel Series.
So it's interesting. I've seen like a rise in people buying headsets. I think a lot of our guests that we have, a lot of times they
LinkedIn wanted
want
me to
to.
use a headset for recording their course. I was like,
I personally hate headsets for a couple reasons. One, they do generally like have a sound that makes you kind of sound like an airline pilot, you know? It's a little like tinny and you know, it's like you know, it well, makes you sound like you're on a headset. But the other thing is it's it's really easy for it to pick up like P sounds, like plosives and wind sound,
Uh,
Okay.
which like, I don't know, like I can't hear myself right now, so I can't tell like, you know, if I'm like doing a lot of like harsh P's or anything like that. But, I have this microphone pointed at like a 45-degree angle in
Okay.
front of my face, not directly in front of it because I want to mitigate the
Okay.
yeah.
sounds that come out of your mouth that sound like, there's like a fairy in your ear punching your eardrum,
Yeah.
So the other thing is that headsets will pick up a lot of that, and as like somebody who then has to engineer that and try to mitigate all of those things, like there are plugins that will do like a whole like mitigation of like plosives overall, but it's
Okay.
not like it doesn't work that well, and so a lot of times I'll have to go in and fix each one of those like plosive sounds
Okay.
Hmm.
like manually and going in and like kind of like turning down the volume just a little bit where that
Okay. Okay.
plosive happens. So like
Yeah.
it can make my work like so much harder to do that. So headsets, I'm not a fan. I'd 100% always rather somebody, and I tend to do this, just have them use their MacBook Pro like
Okay.
microphone or some kind of USB microphone.
Well,
All
and
right.
I
From Levi, who has to fix these things, he's
yeah.
begging you all, do not.
Yeah, I mean, if wherever it's coming out doesn't care, then do whatever's comfortable. But for me,
Yeah.
I'm just like it'll make my life a living hell.
And in terms of the hardware again, because we were talking about microphones, like I know when
Hmm.
because I got the Blue Yeti because just a bunch of people said get it and it seemed to
Hmm.
be good budget wise. Um, the first thing I read was turn your gain all the way down, and then I have it on the cardioid mode. I think that's the one
Yeah.
where so it's like it only picks up what's in front.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yep.
but
Same as this microphone. It's that heart shape thing.
okay,
Hmm.
but the gain, like, why would you ever want it up? I guess my question is it because like if you're in a band you want to hear every noise, or is there another reason for it?
I think it just depends. Like I like right here, I don't know what my gain is like right now because I can't hear myself. I'm hoping I'm not like blasting everyone's ears right now. But you know, it has to do with like how you're recording the microphone. You
Okay.
know, a lot of times I think if you're just something like a USB mic and you're recording it directly into your computer, like that's already going to be recording it like pretty loud.
Okay.
So if you have the gain all the way up, then you run the risk of like, clipping your audio and just like blasting
I did
people's
this
ears.
recently.
And when you clip audio, it's like, so I teach Pro Tools and audio workshops at formerly it was the CUNY Graduate School of Journalism. It's where I used to go to school.
Okay. I didn't
But
know
now
that.
it's
That's cool.
the Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism after he gave him a bunch of money, so they named it after him.
It's like dollar bills,
So-
dollar bills.
yeah. But one of the ways that I like to describe audio a lot of times is through like photo or like visual type analogies.
Okay.
And like when you clip audio, it's as if like you take a picture and it's like not exposed well, and say it's just like you're picking up all that bright white light.
Okay.
Hmm.
In like Photoshop, there's no way to turn down that bright white light. You have destroyed
Okay.
like whatever is there. Clipping's the same way. There's no real way of like making clipping better except for just like in post you just try to turn it down so it doesn't hurt people's ears, but it still sounds like crap.
Yeah.
So
Okay. Okay.
I'd much rather receive audio that's a little too quiet than too loud, because
Okay.
you could turn up quiet audio later. That has its own issues.
Okay.
If your audio is too quiet and you turn it up, a lot of times you'll get a lot of like ambient room sound, and it kind of sounds like a hiss, you know.
Okay. Okay.
But there are better plugins to mitigate that, and it's easier on the ears than just like just the crunchiness of somebody's voice being too loud in gain.
Okay.
Yeah, I recently had to re-record like a big section of because I didn't realize my kid had turned up my gain, and that's one of those things where like I didn't check, and it was so bad. The audio came back. They're like, "Could you redo this, please?" And I was like,
Down a
"Yeah,
bit.
do that gain down."
And kind of we're talking more in like a professional context here, but a professionally made podcast, but like you're saying, like all these things cause more work for you. So like I would imagine it's probably cheaper, and I think we've done this for some of our podcasts. We're just like, hey, we're shipping you microphones because like that has a cost, but it's probably way cheaper than you tweaking an entire podcast because they had a crappy mic. Probably, I'm assuming.
Yeah, and it's also like, it's just wanting to keep the quality the same across people. And, it's hard to do that when everyone's remote because not only does like the equipment quality matter, but the space that people are in. And sometimes,
Yeah.
you know, the spaces are different, and generally echoey spaces are like the killer of quality because mitigating that, the way that a lot of like the plugins and stuff mitigate it is like, you know, it'll make, say, the reverby sound go away, but it'll make the person sound like a little more artificial and processed.
Okay.
And that loses like warmth, things
Okay.
like that. So,
Yeah.
we wanted quality to be similar across. And then also, yeah, I mean, it's just, and it's not that much, it's really
Yeah.
not that much to
Yeah.
have that baseline, like semi-professional quality.
Yeah. So the
Uh,
TLDR is if you're interested, you should probably invest a little bit in at least an okay mic.
Yeah, 100%. It's the same thing as like, okay, I want to, I don't be a photographer, or I want to be like a videographer. Like, are you gonna use your smartphone? Or are you gonna like,
Yeah.
you might for a little bit if like you don't have anything else, but if you have the budget for something a little better, then you might go out and like, for photography, buy like, spend a few $100 and get like a Canon Rebel or something like that, so you have a little bit more like flexibility in how you take pictures and things. It's the same, and I feel like people are like understanding this more now. When I got into like audio stuff, like I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago, people didn't really care, or they
Yeah.
didn't
Yeah.
understand like the difference between quality, because we're a very visual culture, So people like, they can see a video and be like, "Oh, that looks crappy." Like, I've seen better, but if they're, when podcasts were first like coming out and things, like it was the concept of like there being a better, and how to get there was just like less known. It was less ubiquitous than now that, people are, a little
Yeah.
more aware.
Yeah.
and we're all current, not all of us, but lots of us are remote and thinking more of it. I saw a big boom in people buying mics once everyone
Yeah.
was
Oh
having
yeah.
to stay home.
It was frustrating for me because we also like, we were launching this podcast unit, and we're like starting these shows and things, and like all of these like basic equipment things were just like out of stock that we needed, and I was like, oh, thanks COVID.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that people are buying them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That means that they're thinking about quality, so that's cool.
Yeah. Did
We did
somebody
have
have a
another
question?
question.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did have another question. Someone said, and this is besides the questions that we haven't gotten to all of those on the actual AMA, but in the chat, when would you do automations? So someone was, I think we were talking back just a little bit, so they asked this a little bit ago, but when's the point when you would?
So I do automation like pretty much like at the very end. It's one of the last things that I do when I edited, like, so for any one of these shows, I get back like an hour and a half of recorded content.
Mm-hmm.
I edit that down to like 35 to 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that, that's like the first thing I do. And then because I'm also engineering the podcast that I'm editing, like I'm also sort of engineering at the same time, like getting rid of like doing some noise reduction for like the ambient sound. So getting rid of that hiss and things like that, getting rid of those plosives like we were talking about, yada, yada, yada. I do automation pretty much like after everything's all scored, everything's all like put together.
Okay.
I'll go through and do that final polishing of like leveling that sound is essentially what they're talking about.
Yeah.
So that, I'm getting the the average decibel level to where I want it to be. It's like an average, like essentially average loudness that you want, and then like you sort of like decide the range above and below that average that you're also wanting, because you don't want to, you know, you never want your listener to like have to turn up or down
Yeah.
to hear something. You know?
Yeah.
Do you hear
So.
that cat over there?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know. You're game. You're game.
There's people outside my door talking right now. I think maybe the
Yeah.
Crisp software I have on is blocking that, but we'll see.
If it gets too annoying, then I'll let the cats in. But then that's a whole other like can of worms.
It's all
I think
good.
it's
It's all
kind of
good.
cute in the background. Okay, we do have some more questions in the actual AMA, so we'll get to those now then. Ben Helpert asked, what have you learned about technology since starting to work in this vertical?
So it's interesting because it's hard for me to like separate like working at Code Newbie and working at like dev/forum, because like a lot of what I did at Code Newbie I am doing it at dev, and
Okay.
it's
Yeah.
all like a lot of this similar content. And I would say like, I came in with like a very, very limited like knowledge. And when I say came in, when I came into Code Newbie, so this was like 2 years ago or something
Okay.
now. I don't know. I came in with a very limited knowledge of like tech, like this specific like niche of like you know like coding, like dev work, this
Yeah.
sort of like ecosystem of like tech. Before, I got my master's in journalism with a focus in audio storytelling, and my focus was also
That's
like
a cool
health and
focus.
science. Yeah,
Okay.
I specifically went to get into podcasting. That's a whole other
Yeah.
story of how I got like got it into my head that I wanted to be a podcaster, and somehow make a living from it, which back then was like, kind of a ridiculous idea. But
Hey, you saw it through.
yeah, it worked out.
There you
Yeah.
go.
But so I worked at Marketplace and worked on Marketplace tech for like a year and a half. And so like, you know, I'd covered a lot of tech, but not like specifically this niche.
Uh-huh.
And so since working at like Code Newbie and dev/forum, and like, sort of being more integrated in like this specific community of folks, and like, you know, looking at stories and issues and stuff from this specific angle, there are a lot of things that, I know now that I didn't. The obvious one is, of course, what are all these tools and resources?
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
sort of like the Vims and the nodes and the like, all the different languages. You have the Rubies and the Rusts and the, and learning
Yeah.
like the specific differences and what like you might want to use one over another to like do certain things, and like, the benefits and costs of like each one of those things. Not to mention like even more like tech nerdy, like getting into like the cloud space and like Kubernetes and like what all that stuff is. Like there was no reason for me to know any of that when I was covering like general tech. Like
Yeah.
unless like, I don't know, there was some like hack or like a thing that was like, more I think interesting to a general populace. Like there was no reason for me to know that. But for this, like just the fact that it exists and how it works is interesting enough to like be of interest to this audience. Then on the other side, I think like socially, there's like a lot of social things within the tech space that like I've been made aware of, just being more like, you know, integrated in the
Okay.
community. And like, so if you're covering tech, like say at Marketplace Tech or something, you might talk about, you know, that tech is not a very diverse space,
Yeah.
and like it's just very like homogenous and mostly like, you know, white male. We might cover that, and that might be of interest to like general populace and stuff like that. But there's other things that we've covered here that like, you know, I think are really interesting, and that I think maybe even has more of an impact that we're covering it on
Okay.
like tech itself, because the people that are listening to it are the people creating the tech. So certain episodes like when we spoke to Penelope Fippen about tech constantly dead naming trans folks,
Yeah.
like, you know,
Yeah.
that's a super important like tech thing I didn't know about before. I learned about it because she wrote something on Dev. I was like
Yeah.
in this community now, and we had it be our pilot because it's honestly a very like fixable issue. It's
Yep.
causing like certain people a lot of like emotional stress and pain. And here's somebody who's like, I'm one of these people, and I'm also a knowledgeable developer.
Yeah.
Here's how you can fix these things.
Yeah.
Things
Yeah.
like that. There was another episode we did, which was one of my favorite interviews on Code Newbie, which was about diversity and inclusion, but somebody talking about how a lot of times tech companies think of diversity and inclusion in terms of like, oh, like we'll fix this by hiring more white women, you know,
Yeah. Hey,
and
yeah. Yeah.
it's like that's not what diversity and inclusion means, you know, but it's
Yeah.
how it ends up like coming about or like manifesting in a lot of tech companies.
Yeah.
So like, I don't know, and all these things sort of came out because of for me being in this new space, looking specifically, in these communities of developers.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
really cool. I don't know if you all noticed that, but my power just went out for a minute and then it came back on. So I
Uh,
got most of that, but I like
I
went
didn't
out for a
notice. I,
second there.
I was fixated on Levi in the video. So,
Yeah.
but um, but yeah, I guess that brings up a topic too. I think it ties into a question Gracie has. I'll just pull it up
Yeah.
here. Um, yeah. Uh, so the question is, so many, like, what elements when combined make a great podcast? There's about
Mm.
4 points, but we can probably touch on each of them. But we'll
Yeah.
start with that.
What elements make a great podcast? Um, for me, I mean, like we were talking about before, editorially, it's something that's like, you know, it satisfies that why. Like, why should people care?
Yeah.
Like, there are a lot of things that people like personally care, like will care about, but like in a broader, like sort of like audience,
Yeah.
it doesn't really hold up, you know? So one, it should satisfy that why, both like in a general concept of like the show as a whole,
Okay.
what is your theme? Really like thinking through, like for our podcast, we went through several stages of like people pitching shows, then picking apart those pitches and being like, okay, like I like this aspect of how we're thinking about the show, but maybe we focus it more like this,
Okay.
or how do we want like the vibe to be? What's our voice? Is it going to be like more candid, or is it going to be more buttoned up? Like, who is our audience?
Okay. Yeah.
Which goes into that why. And then, yeah, from large, the podcast as a whole, to like certain like episodes and stories and things you're talking about. And then the other thing, I think, I mean, I care about this a lot, quality of sound.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean, and it makes sense, and I can totally relate to this, even though I'm not an audiophile. It's happened. I remember I don't listen to the radio as much now. Sometimes when I drive, but even on the radio, sometimes you switch stations or whatever, and then all of a sudden one's louder than the other. I don't know if it's just my bad stereo. I don't know, but but it is the one place I've noticed it the most is like if you ever made like people don't make mix CDs anymore, but like you'd record songs from different and then you'd be like, oh, this is great, and the sound isn't equal, like one's higher, one's lower, and like obviously there's software that can adjust that, like you were saying, but it's super annoying, like you mentioned, when you're just like, it's like, okay, that's too low, so you crank it up, and then the next one comes on and you're like, oh my, and it's like
What bothers me is that, okay, per station, maybe they have like their own specs for like how loud they want something. I don't know why that I feel like it should be in general across like radio. Like generally when I'm like producing something for radio, like there is a certain decibel level there that they're like, this is what it has to be to fit our specifications. So it like,
Okay.
that doesn't happen. But who knows? I'm maybe between radio
Maybe it's a
stations, or
DJ.
like, or maybe it's just the DJ not like
Yeah,
paying
DJ was like,
attention to that. But it annoys the hell out of me when it's television.
okay.
And like,
Yeah.
say you're like on Hulu or something and you're watching a show, like sometimes the advertisements will be
Yes, they're
much
always
louder
way
than the
louder.
show. And it's like, I don't know
Yeah.
if they're doing that on purpose, or there's just
Get your
not like,
attention.
it's like, there should be like a spec that it's like, okay, if you're going to turn this ad in, the decibel should be here,
Yeah.
but anyway, so there's that. And yeah, I would say those three things: the content,
Okay.
why should it exist? Thinking about like, your audience, your why, and your overall like structure of the show, things like that.
Okay.
Because you want it to be like a seamless listening experience, and then the audio quality of with equipment and things like that.
Yeah. And okay, I'll move on to. I have more questions about audio. We'll go through the questions. So another question was like, it's kind of more like a little deeper, but what effect do you think podcasting and podcasts have had on society?
At least for me, and I think like people that I know, podcast and what turned me on to podcasts in the first place was it provided a very like accessible way of consuming like news, and just like news and perspectives
Yeah.
that you know filled a space that we didn't have before. Now we can sort of like all in New York, like a train commute's about 45 minutes to an hour. I filled that time with podcasts, and it like sort of supplemented me with something that I was missing from like being out of school.
Yeah.
After I like graduated from undergrad, I was like, I wasn't like, I'd read stuff, and I'd
Yeah.
read news online and stuff like that, but I think the format of like hearing somebody talk about issues and stuff like allowed me to like soak it in more and be more invested. And so, you know, I think in all, it just gave us this medium that's very accessible, especially for busy people. Like, you could do your laundry, you could wash your dishes, all these chores while like consuming like important like news and perspectives. And it also made it easier, you know, for those perspectives and different ones to come out. The barrier of entry, I mean, I harp on equipment and stuff, but like,
Yeah.
like I said, it's not that expensive to be able to do this.
Yeah.
So I think we're getting a lot more diversity of content
Cool.
that's accessible to like everybody.
Did you want to grab the next question from Gracie, or did you want to grab another question, Christina?
Yeah, I think we should do the next one from her too. I think that's fine. Um,
Yeah.
one joke one first, she said, but then we can say the other one. She said, "Would you consider rating and subscribing to her podcast?"
Maybe.
Yeah.
Hopefully 5
Depends on how
stars.
good your audio is, Gracie, and then he'll
Yeah,
maybe rate and subscribe. But the other one was, as a producer and storyteller, how do you make potentially niche subjects satisfy experts while appealing to a more general audience?
I mean, that's what we're always chasing, right?
Yeah.
That's when I went to school, and my whole life for like those 18 months was like different professors hammering away, like you know you know okay, like pitch this thing, but then like they'll tear you apart to be like, I don't find this interesting, like what, I don't care. And then
Yeah.
you're sort of like and then you sort of like go again and again and again.
Yeah.
For me, you you just have to look at stakeholders,
Yeah.
and like really like you need to really brain on it for a little bit, on like, okay, here's this thing that I think is interesting, because that's where a lot of stories come from.
Yeah.
Maybe something happens to you, or you hear, you start seeing a trend in some data or something, where you're like, oh, that I kind of find this interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And then you sort of like start thinking about the different stakeholders of people. The more stakeholders, like the more like general interest you're going to have, say like, you know something like the Penelope Fippen episode.
Yeah.
Like, here's the thing, uh, I found was interesting, was something that I hadn't heard about very much, and that there were like, multiple stakeholders there. One, there's the people like trans folk who are like very emotionally affected by this. Two, there are other folks that are just like, in general, there's good people who change their name, after getting married or something like that,
Yeah.
or whatever. That's a pain in the butt to not be able to like, easily change different handles and stuff, and
Yeah.
constantly be called by your, like, I don't know, former last name or something. And then there's also something that Penelope brought up, which was people who say are domestic abuse survivors and change their name for that. People
Okay.
in witness protection, things like that, who don't necessarily want to like just completely delete all these things, and start anew, but should
Yeah.
be able to change it so that they can maintain their data, but also not like essentially be like, I don't know, like outed for like, their
Yeah.
former life or whatever,
Yeah.
as a domestic abuse survivor.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good
So
point.
that multiple stakeholders, multiple interest, and something that like I hadn't heard covered very much. That's
Mm-hmm.
one thing.
Yeah.
If it's just something that's like, seems new to you, and obviously something that seems new to you might not be new to everybody. Like,
Yeah.
you know, there are certain things that like, you know, I'll be like, oh wow, like, did you hear about this new thing? And it's like, oh, Levi, have you been living under a rock? Which I do. I do live under a rock. That's
Yeah.
as much as I can afford in New York City is living under a
That's
rock.
where he gets all his
But
strength lifting the rocks
yeah,
every morning. So.
exactly. These guns. But yeah. So those are a few tips. Think about stakeholders. Think about you know, if it's actually something new and interesting that people haven't like talked about to death, or it's just like, if it is talked about to death, you really need to focus in on that new angle.
Yeah, or I know Vaidehi talked about this a bit in terms of just her base CS podcasts or bloggings. It's like, and I think a lot of folks, this is just content in general, could be audio or written, but I think people have that like, oh, people have already written about this before,
Mm-hmm.
but Vadi, he was saying like, sure. I think I don't know if it was if I talked to her on the offsite or if this was on when we had her on the stream, but it's like everybody can explain things in a different way, and
Right.
and like what she did with like Base CS was make so many things approachable to folks. Like I listened to a lot of those episodes even though I've been doing dev for a long time because one, I could listen to her talk to anything. I was telling her like she could read a shampoo bottle and I'd be like, oh yeah, that's interesting. But like she was able to like say these things in a very easily communicated manner,
Mm-hmm.
whereas I could learn the same thing looking in some dry computer science book and probably bang my head a ton of times before I get it, so like
Yeah.
I don't know if that applies to podcasting as well, or
I think it does for like, we talk to a lot of people on the podcast who are like, developer advocates and things and educators. And in terms of like, if you are just like making educational content, I think like, yeah, maybe like, how you, I don't know, make some sort of like, I don't know, like Twitter like clone through some sort of like certain language.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe there's a bunch of different people who've written about that already. But in terms of educational content, there's like value in how you might explain something,
Yeah.
and that goes for like educational podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody else could come out with another like sort of like computer science explainer podcast like Vitahe did, and cover the same exact stuff. And maybe just the fact of who they are and how the different types of like metaphors they might use or,
Yeah.
analogies and stuff could provide value.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
even as someone who's a listener, I think I tend to do that. If there's like some kind of subject I'm wanting to learn, I'll find like multiple people doing similar stuff because I can just gather different things from each of them. So
Yeah. I do that when I'm learning songs. I listen to a lot of covers, like different covers of songs if I'm learning a song. It's kind of similar. You're sort of like hearing different people's take on the same thing. And for some reason, listening to that like diversity of content of the same thing sort of helps me wrap my brain around it.
Yeah, it
sort
makes
of
me,
off subject, do you sing or do you play an instrument for learning songs, or you just like learning songs?
Oh, I do both. Here, I'll show you. Here's
you
just
wouldn't happen to
some
play
of-
the banjo, Levi, would you?
Oh, I
My
happen to
husband plays
do.
the banjo,
Oh.
so this is fun.
Yeah, that is some of my. I didn't buy them all at once. I've been playing music for a while, but yeah, that is one of my walls of instruments.
Nice. I am not a musician, but my husband and like most of his family are. So I'm very much used to instruments and their costs.
Yeah, I won't talk about. I'm not gonna talk about how much I've spent on instruments.
Yes. Speaking of cover bands, I just happened to come across this tweet in a conversation I was having with somebody the other day, and I'll paste the link in there. But it's if you've ever, it's an older song, but like there's this song from Third Eye Blind called "Semi Charmed Kind of Life." It was really popular in the '90s, and there's this guy that's doing a cover it, but singing it the way like he's. If it was Blink 182 singing it, so I'm gonna post it in there. It's really good. Like it's not like he's not singing crappy. He sounds like Blink 182. So anyway, so I'm gonna pop that in there for just a fun little link. But
Awesome.
Yeah.
We're talking about audio today. This works. It's not.
Yeah.
All right, we do have a question from Vitahe. So,
Cool.
So hey, hi Levi. She says,
Hello.
What's the number one mistake in your opinion that podcasters or podcast producers make when producing and creating new content? And what should they be doing instead?
Number one mistake. How do I choose? No. Um,
Microphones.
I don't want to beat a dead horse, but it's those two things. It's like
Yeah.
just looking up decent equipment, like, you know, putting in that initial investment, to sound better, and that initial investment in like just knowledge, and then
Yeah.
two, like, why should you even be doing what you're doing? You
Yeah.
know, the why. Like, think a lot about that. I'm trying to think of another one. Let me give this a little think. So I find some other like knowledge bomb to drop. Um, um, I mean, it's really hard. Um, I think if you're like, I don't know if it's like a mistake, but it's definitely like just like something that if you're say trying to like do an interview show or something like that, say just like a basic like two-way interview show,
Mhm.
um, knowing and like learning how to facilitate a conversation.
Yeah.
Um, and there is like there are podcasts about interviewing people. I
Okay.
forget. There's one. I'll toss it to you later so you could put it in some show notes or something.
Hmm.
But it is like, uh, you know, a well-known producer, host person interviewing other well-known, like, uh, radio and podcast interviewers,
Yeah.
Okay.
and how they, go about hosting and facilitating conversation. I think it's an interesting set of like of skills that you need to have,
Hmm.
and things you need to juggle in terms of like one, like your personality should come through, you know,
Yeah.
and it should feel like a conversation. Um, two, like with that, there's some guests probably like me that just talk on and on and on. Knowing when to
It's
shut
all
them up
good. It's all
and
good.
how to do it is really like important.
Yeah.
Um, and sort of like, also just like being prepared,
Hmm.
you know,
Yeah.
doing prep. Like, I think new podcasters don't realize, and a lot of people that I give private lessons to folks about podcasting and as well as like using audio equipment and things like that, or,
Yeah.
Okay.
editing on Pro Tools. When I talk to them about the amount of prep that just goes into a two-way conversation, a lot of times they're shocked,
Yeah.
but a lot of prep goes into it because, you know, you're taking an hour, maybe an hour and a half of somebody's time,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and you want to squeeze as much good content out of that as possible.
Yeah.
You want to make it hard for yourself to edit that thing down to like your 30 or 40 minutes.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
So, you know, I think probably that's another number one mistake. It's just like not being well prepared.
No, I think that's a great perspective. I've been on, a guest on podcasts, and the podcasts where, just like you said, where they had something where they sent me things and we talked back and forth, and there was going to be some questions that I knew that I could prepare a little bit beforehand and that
Hmm.
they had those were the ones that I was like the most comfortable being on, the ones I feel like went well, versus other ones where I've been on podcasts and it's just been like, okay, what do you want to talk about? I'm like, I don't know, what are we talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Why did you reach out to me?
yeah. I had a sandwich at lunch. It was good. It's a little spicy, but I have heartburn now. I don't know. Yeah. Yeah, I can totally see that. It's kind of funny given the context of what we do on the stream, because the stream is kind of free flowing. Like
Yeah.
we have. I mean, we have a theme of what's going on and stuff, but
Hmm.
like when we do the pair programming, for example, there's we've looked at the issue we're going to work on, but
Hmm.
aside from that, it's really trying to figure out things, so it's like kind of freestyle in that sense. But when we have folks on like yourself, with there's like an AMA, so I guess it's
Hmm.
structured in some
Yeah.
to some degree.
And I
But
mean, like, if you're doing pair programming and stuff like that, I mean, you're also like imitating something that happens like
Yeah.
in actuality in your
yeah,
work. So, that's the like that freeform is like what you're showing, you know? So
Yeah.
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 And I gotta say, I do like the freeform style. It's kind of, I don't think I would want to start the stream with not having any idea of what we're gonna talk about, like kind of like what Christina was saying with like a bad podcast interview.
Hmm.
But if you kind of have like the general idea, I've been enjoying it. I don't know,
Hmm.
just it's just fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, but even from my own experience, and I don't know, Levi, if you've had the experience too, where like a podcast tends to be a little bit different than say like the Twitch stream. Because I was recently on a Twitch stream with Vonage, and it was like we didn't necessarily prepare anything ahead of time. We were just like, hey, here's some like general stuff we could talk about, and that went
Hmm.
fine for like the hour we talked or whatever, because it's a different format than when you're on a
Yeah.
podcast. A lot of times you're not seeing each other when you're talking on a podcast. I think that
Hmm.
makes it a
Oh,
little
that's true.
different.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
and there it's more like interviewing you. Like I don't just sit there and like interview you, or you don't interview me on these streams, right? We all
Hmm.
just kind of talk together. When you know someone's going to be like asking you questions, you want to
Yeah.
know what the questions are, because you don't want to come off like
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
I
don't know
mean,
what I'm talking about.
I
Yeah. Exactly.
I pretty much never send questions ahead of time to people.
Yeah.
Um, I will pre-interview people before having them
Mhm.
on the show because I want to make sure that one, they know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Two, that they have good presence.
Yeah.
Some people can be super knowledgeable, but you know, they're dead boring to listen to. Like just
Yeah.
how they are, and that's unfortunate. But
Sorry.
maybe they're great in a written form. Audio is just not their
Yeah.
medium.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm checking that, and then also, I'm kind of slowly like I'm doing like a mini interview of what they're gonna have later
Mhm.
with more depth with somebody like Saran or somebody who's more knowledgeable than me about a lot of these things. But I'm sort of
Yeah.
picking their brain
Yeah.
and building the interview prep for Saran, where I'm like,
Okay.
okay, like after doing research on this subject, talking to this person, picking their brains, then I'm going to create sort of like this prep where I'm like, okay, here's sort of the narrative flow of our interview.
Yeah.
Because that's another thing that people need to think about or know about is that, in journalism, we talk about stories a lot, you know, and like how to write a story, and a lot of times people just think that, oh, stories are just like, things that are more narrative or something like that. This American Life has a story that they're walking you along, you know,
Yeah.
Yeah.
but people also need to think about interviews as stories. Like everything needs to have a narrative flow. You are walking people along sort of a path of knowledge,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and you don't want anything to distract them and get in the way of being able to soak up that knowledge. So, like, in terms of interviewing people, that is also like a story. What is
Mhm.
their story? What is the story about this thing? And that should have a beginning, middle, and an end. And you should kind of have a concept of that's going to be ahead of time
Okay.
Yeah.
and have follow-up questions and things like that, because that's a part of that facilitation. It's like you're guiding this conversation because you want your audience to like get everything out of this like interaction that
Yeah.
you can.
Yeah.
And, and tying into what you're saying there about like not having the narrative and trying not to break it, because like people you kind of get invested into it if it's a solid podcast.
Hmm.
How does that work with commercials? Because I am because like we have sponsors on some of
Hmm.
ours, or other folks have some kind
Mhm.
of commercials or sponsors. So I imagine you must have to say at some point, okay, listen, we're gonna wrap up in like 10 minutes and then start on the next thing or something, or like how do you go
Oh,
about handling that?
I I say it's like just our interviews. I try to find like places in the conversation where it feels like there's a natural pause. Or like,
Okay.
naturally you might switch topics. In
Yeah.
Code Newbie, we begin every episode digging into the person's like coding journey and own developer
Mhm.
background. Usually the first 10 to 15 minutes might be that, you
Okay.
Yeah.
know? And then, we might switch gears to like their expertise, you know?
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll talk to somebody about their coding journey, how they learned the thing that we're about to talk about in the midsection of the show, which, might be like, let's get into like machine learning, or what is it, like how do you learn it, things like that. And so there's like a sort of natural like segmentation of the interview itself that we already have planned ahead of time in that interview prep. Like we know that like we're going to be winding down and switching gears there. So that's where I'll put an ad. And, also like, yeah, I mean, ads split up content. It splits up flow, but it is necessary. And I like hate people who complain about too many ads on a show.
Yeah.
One,
I just
this is
fast
free
forward
content. This is free. We're not making you pay for this. Don't complain about free content. That's like, if I didn't have to pay for Hulu, I pay for Hulu and they put ads in there. Like, I'm like, we're not doing that. So one, like, quit your griping. You're not paying for this. Two, there's a nifty little thing if like ads like for some reason like are the bane of your existence and you can't like sit through a minute or two of like some ad. There's that nifty button where you can just press 15 minutes ahead, 15 minutes ahead, and like try to find the place where the ad stops. Like podcast apps make it easy. I will say that we see when you do that in analytics, and it makes us sad.
Don't make Levi sad.
I'm sorry.
Because these things, like, ads are there.
Well, here's the thing. My kids have grown up in the generation of like Netflix, and they're not used to commercials, and they listen to podcasts with us. And so if a commercial comes on, that's when they start complaining, like, "What the? Where's the story?" And so we just fast forward, right?
Yeah. Why is this man selling a car now? What's going on?
Yeah. I don't blame folks, but also like, ads are there for a reason. This content is free. If you don't want ads, then there's going to be like, another thing like a subscription, So I don't know. I don't get the whole like this thing has too many ads, so I'm going to give you 2 stars. It's like I didn't want your listen anyway. Sorry, this free content wasn't to your liking.
That's where I had to also learn not to. Although I think everyone complains about this. This is like it's not podcasts. It's like when you go to a recipe site and then there's the whole story or whatever, and everyone complains about that. I don't want to see a whole story. I just want the recipe. And it's like this is someone's
How
blog.
much sugar? How much sugar?
Yeah.
This is someone's blog. They can put whatever they want, and it's a free recipe on there. So I guess we just need to get over it.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's not like an annoying ad like a pop-up. It's not like these ads are popping up willy-nilly in the episode. Like if you go to a blog, you might have like a video pop-up that plays automatically, and you're like, this is ruining my experience of this like thing. We're not doing that to you. It's like, here is a preordained spot where this 2 minutes are taken up.
Yeah. Where they normally transition nicely too. Most podcasters are like, and now it's time for something.
Yeah, so, you are forewarned.
We do have another follow-up question in the chat about this. So they ask, how extensive are podcast analytics? What can you see or not see?
Mainly we get downloads.
Okay.
So we'll get download numbers. It's kind of funky how they calculate those. Like, there's questions of like, if you listen to a podcast, you halfway through on your commute, and then you pause and listen to it on your commute home or something like that. Does that count as 2 downloads? Is that 2 listens, or is it just 1? Like, in terms of like what data we can actually get, it's hard. I don't know. It's not it. We get some demographics from Apple, but I don't know if that's just demographics from people listening on like Apple Podcasts. I don't think that picks up like everybody who might be listening on their browser or, a different podcast app. So mainly what we can kind of trust is downloads.
Okay. Yeah.
Also, average consumption, but also Apple gives us that. So I don't know if it's average consumption just by Apple podcast listeners. So,
Okay.
Gotcha.
yeah.
I mean, I usually listen on Spotify. I'm gonna be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I don't care where people listen. I just want people to listen.
Yeah. And actually, if I'm on Dev, anyways, a lot of times I'll just listen on Dev because you can just click on it.
Yeah,
there's. But
yeah, is there, I mean, there's the analytics, like, do you grab analytics from all those platforms? Like, I know there's like Overcast, there's Apple, obviously. Do you, is there like some kind of central analytics for like to kind of aggregate all these different ones, or do you just check out certain platforms?
In terms of, yeah, we do have a platform that gives us like overall downloads.
Okay.
okay.
And like different ones will be like, there's like the Simplecast, there's Blueberry, there's Megaphone. There's all these things where they allow you to like have space for you to upload an episode, and then it sort of keeps track of like downloads across stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, cool,
Yeah,
cool.
they were saying it's because you mentioned seeing when a user skips the ad, so that's why they were asking.
Oh, yeah. That, sort of depends on the platform as well. Back in the day when I was at Gizmodo Media, we used Megaphone, which
Okay.
has like a very like extensive platform in analytics. So they are more able to see where you might have dips in that consumption.
Okay.
Other platforms might not give you that as detailed of analytics. So, it depends on, honestly, probably how much money you want to spend.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, that makes sense.
yeah.
Do you have a follow-up?
Yeah,
Nick?
I had a follow-up. It's not analytics. Is there another one related to analytics in the? I didn't see one in the chat.
No, the next question is your question, so I figure you wanted to get to it, but you can ask whatever question you want now. So-
It kind of ties into. I mean, we talked. I'm kind of curious from a technical standpoint. What does it take to put together a solid podcast? I know we talked about hardware, so there's that. But I'm curious, like, since there's a bunch of devs probably tuning in too, like,
Yeah.
what's your go-to software or software
Yeah.
recommendations for folks starting out? Plug-in recommendations. Like, we can maybe put these out later on after, but like definitely give some shout outs to what you love using for software.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I'll give a rundown of like what it takes from like sort of like start to finish, from concept to, having something out there in the world. So one, a lot of brainstorming. And, that's sort of brainstorming by myself on what I think might be an interesting episode or something like that.
Okay.
And then brainstorming like with other folks, like your hosts or other people who are like in your editorial. So for like, say, Dev News,
Yeah.
it's, me, Saran, and Josh deciding what sort of news bits we want to cover.
Yeah.
And so there's that. Then once we sort of all agreed and sort of like decided, okay, this is sort of like what we want to talk about, then it's like, who's the best person to talk about this? And then also looking, and I can't stress this enough, demographically about like your guests.
Yeah.
Like I said, tech is very homogenous. It's very, very easy to just have a bunch of white people on your podcast if it's a tech podcast.
Yeah.
Keeping track of that is important. I will say things like Dev News, where we essentially have like a day to book a guest because we start our editorial on like Monday, and then by like essentially, yeah, by Tuesday evening, we need that script and guest to be
Okay.
solidly booked by Wednesday morning.
That's pretty amazing that you can do that.
Yeah.
We can. I will say, because it's tech and easier to get white people, a lot of times, like, more of those guests have been more white people, which, we try really hard to make it not just white people, but, having that short period of time, like, really puts the crunch in there, and like sometimes it just doesn't pan out the way you want it to. Not to say that like I've regretted any of our guests. They've all been great guests. It's just like
Yeah.
keeping those demographics is more difficult on a time crunch. Or keeping that diversity of demographics. But for a show like, Dev Discuss, Code Newbie, where we have more time to really like, like think about what we're covering and who can cover it, and because we don't just want to put in like a token,
Yeah.
we want somebody who also is knowledgeable and great, So for those shows, it's easier to like have that diversity of content. So there's that, and that's a part of like the sort of like editorial / booking process. So then you book the guest, then we record the thing. We use a combination of Zoom and something called Mumble.
Okay.
Mumble is kind of, I believe it's like gamers used it a lot before Discord
I gotta check
was
it out.
like big. It's a little weird, wonky software that allows you to record high fidelity backups, multi-tracked. So kind of like a Zencaster type of thing. But it's
I
free.
think I grabbed the right one. I'm putting it into the chat. Oh, no, you already
I
did.
I
Dang it,
pasted
Nick,
my,
you beat me.
normally I can't paste stuff in because I'm busy doing other stuff. But,
I will say Mumble has a weird setup. So like every guest, if we're going to use Mumble with them, which a lot of times on Dev News, because we are on a time crunch,
yeah.
and we need to like do that interview in like, 30 minutes. We end up just using Zoom and having them do their local recording and cross our fingers and hope that the local recording doesn't explode, because I don't want to just use the Zoom recording because Zoom will kill quality.
Okay. You do both. Okay. I was curious about that. Yeah.
We do that with Mumble too. Mumble just gives us better backups.
Okay.
Each guest we use Mumble with, though, we have to walk through like a really annoying setup, but it's in service of like, getting those high fidelity backups, which I've had to use a number of times. Like everybody here who's a tech person knows tech is unreliable.
Yeah.
And a thing that I think makes a good producer, great producer over a good producer, is the amount of paranoia that things will mess up. So I like to have a lot of backups.
All right.
So there's Mumble. We record the thing. It's like an hour and a half, depending on the show and the content. And then after that, I edit in Pro Tools.
Okay.
I know it's Pro Tools. A lot of people find scary. You also have to pay like $32 a month to use it.
Okay.
But it is, in my opinion, and I think objectively, the best audio editing software out there. And especially if you also want to engineer and mix your stuff. But other alternatives, I know some really awesome engineers who use Reaper.
Okay.
I think Reaper is something that also a lot of techies would like because it's very customizable. But, and sort of like a conversation we had on Devs Discuss recently, which will an episode we'll have coming out later this year about Vim, sounds very similar to Vim, where you might have to do a lot of setup to get it how you want it to, but once you do, like, you'll be stoked. I don't want to do that. I want it to work well right away. Also, like, I want to be able to share my stuff with other people who are like Pro Tools users and stuff, and not everyone's a Reaper user, and shareability gets weird when you're using different audio editing software. Audition is fine. It's not my favorite. It's meh. But it's accessible, so that's cool. Other things people use are like Hindenburg or Audacity.
Okay.
Just use Pro Tools. Just take a lesson from somebody like me. You do a couple lessons, you'll be fine. And then, so I edit that, and then I mix it. I would say if you're thinking about like mixing and engineering your own podcast, look into Isotope software. Their RX, I think they're up to RX8, the RX8 standard. It's expensive. It's like, I don't know, 300 or 400 bones, but also it's like some of the best mixing plugins out there.
Okay. And this, just to stop you for a sec, when you say mixing plugins, do you mean like so you can integrate music with the podcast and stuff? Is that what you mean
Oh
by mixing?
no. So by mixing, I mean like that engineering portion, which is like
Okay.
I sort of like split up. There's like, to me in my mind and most places, there's like three different aspects to like making like radio or podcasts. There's like, you know, the editorial. There's like the producing, and then there's the engineering.
Yeah.
Editorial and producing kind of mix together a lot of times, where, you know, like I consider like a producer should edit the audio.
Okay.
To me, that's editorial. You're making editorial decisions. It's not just like, you know, say booking the guest or like thinking about the like being a part of that brainstorm, things like that. So they sort of intersect a lot, but
Okay.
things for me, like in my mind, I'm sort of like, okay, the brainstorming stuff and like the actual editing, like cutting up the audio and like making like a nice flowing 30-40 minute conversation. I think
Yeah.
about that as like being my editor brain. Then the producer brain is sort of like in my mind, more of like logistical stuff, like booking guests. Maybe also more of that, like thinking about the editorial, but more from like a logistical standpoint. You know,
Okay.
where is the person? Like the time zone? What's the, you know, all of those types of things.
Yeah.
And then the engineering side is like, you know, mixing the stuff, which falls under like, you know, making sure the levels are all even, like we were talking about. You don't want people
Yeah.
to turn up or down their volume, getting rid of those like plosive sounds, or if somebody has like a whistly like S, you know,
Yeah.
some people, if you don't mitigate some of their S sound, it sounds like they're stabbing a needle in your eardrum with their S's.
Yeah.
Engineering you'll mitigate that. Or sticky mouth. There
Okay.
are certain podcasts I cannot listen to because the host has too much sticky mouth.
What is
Like,
sticky mouth?
I
sticky
want
mouth is like,
to simulate it. I want to hear it.
it's like when your mouth is dry and you kind of,
Ah, okay,
those
okay,
Oh.
yeah.
sounds,
Like
which I might
your
have
cat's
because,
eating food.
exactly, which I might have right now because like I'm out of water and coffee and
Now that I
shit.
know
But,
all
you know,
these, when I go back and have to listen to myself, I'm gonna be like,
yeah.
"This is the
Yeah.
stuff I do."
What?
And to be fair, I just mentioned coffee. Technically, coffee is not a great thing to listen to or to drink before you're like gonna be on air or whatever, or record
Yeah.
yourself. Or milk.
Something
Don't do
warm.
that.
Oh,
Probably just
milk, really?
water. Yeah, no, just like water or tea.
Okay.
But also, I'm not a stickler, so I was drinking coffee right now.
It's
Um,
okay. It's okay. We haven't reached professional grade stream yet, so the coffee's all good.
but yeah, so things like sticky mouth, you can mitigate that, and then also like things like, you know, making the equipment sound as good as possible. It's making crappy equipment sound better and making really good equipment sound like optimum. You know.
Yeah.
Cool.
So that's the engineering part, and you know, it all takes a lot of time.
Nice. Yeah.
But yeah,
Awesome.
Yeah.
and then so that's that. Then I mix the thing, and then you know, the end is doing that automation. That is a part of the mixing engineering part, and then you know, I export that thing, put it on our platform to send it out, and the RSS feed, and make the website so it's all accessible.
Cool.
I appreciate you producers and editors, and I've done courses and I had to do my own editing. It's always horrible for me because I am not someone who can edit well, and when I can just send it off when I'm done and they make
Yeah.
it beautiful, I'm like, yay. I
It's
like working
funny.
with you.
My dad, he had to edit some like webinar talk he
Okay.
gave or something, like once upon a time, and you know, it was like 30 minutes or something, and he said it took him 2 weeks to edit this thing.
doesn't take me
And-
that long, but it is
Yeah.
something that I know, like, it's more like, yeah, I can edit it, but I know I'm not getting the sound like how it
Yeah.
could be or as nice as like.
Well, the fun thing about editing is that I edit the shit out of these things where like, I'm not only just like editing for content, but also like I'm taking out the or like the
Yeah.
meandering thoughts, the tangents, or moving those tangents later to like where it makes more sense where that tangent might be, or that
Yeah.
like somebody might be like, they might mention something and then go off to like finish another thought that they had. Well, I'm just going to take out that tangent part, shove it over there at the end, and push those other like thoughts that actually go together because like I said, you don't want your audience to like have any reason to tune out. And too many likes or ums or things, like I take those out. Mostly it's like, when you're editing, and I can't stress this enough, you know have your ethical hat on. Don't change the meaning of anything that anyone's saying,
Yeah.
or you also have to think about like, things that are a part of like their personality. For example,
Yeah.
I might take out like a stutter here and there that somebody has, just because I'm like, I don't need that. It doesn't change the meaning, unless it's a politician. You probably don't want to take out things for politicians
Okay.
because, so
Makes
that
sense.
just a general rule, don't do that for politicians. But researchers and things like that, you might want to take out some stutters and meandering, like things like that, because the main thing you want to get across is the information.
Yeah.
Or say you're interviewing somebody with like, who like is a person who stutters, who has like a general stuttering like issue.
Yeah.
You probably don't really want to edit those out. Like that's sort of like changing who they are,
Yeah.
Yeah. I see what you
So
mean.
you gotta think about like when you're editing, sort of like what is ethical all
Yeah,
the
because I
time.
think
Yeah.
I think some of us, and Nick and I have laughed about this because I've told him, because I've gone back and worked with the captions and stuff. There's stuff we do where we say like or
Yeah.
a lot, or we'll
Mm-hmm.
repeat words without realizing, and we'll say something like
Yeah,
a little bit of a stutter, but it's not something that
Yeah.
like we do a lot. And so I
yeah,
could see editing those out. But I agree.
Yeah.
I have talked to people or interviewed people and who do have a stutter, and it's something
hmm
that's who they are. And if you took that out, I think it would make them feel weird, and it
yeah,
also just like
Yeah.
takes away from who they are. Yeah.
exactly. And
But
like it's you know for those things like the ums or the other like like brain farts that people might have that you take out, like you know I am editing those out also for time. Like, I
yeah.
am trying to get trying to give you 40 minutes of like good like content that sounds natural. One, like if you take out ums and things like that, you also have to be like a part of being a good editor is like making it sound natural. Like you don't want
Yeah.
people to sound like robots,
Yeah.
things like that. So it's making it sound natural, and also like you know there was this one. I tell this story a lot. I told it in a. I was on a panel for Podfest, something like that. It
Okay.
was in Philadelphia like a couple years ago, and I was talking about editing, and I recently had edited this conversation with this dude who like had really interesting information. Like he had like he was super smart, like wrote about some really interesting things, but he kind of like had like a 2 second pause between each like sentence,
Wow.
which
Okay.
is a long time.
Yeah.
And my host thought it was going to be unusable
Yeah.
because it was just like you're sort of sitting there and you're going like this, like yeah, what you
Yeah.
say. I painstakingly took out those pauses
Yeah.
because it really like didn't like it didn't add anything.
Yeah.
You know, it
Were they
made
good
it.
at not doing ums and likes though? I wonder if they paused because they learned, because I know
They might
taking
have, yeah.
speech class that a lot of times teacher will be like, don't say or like,
Right.
pause, think about
Right.
what you're going to say. So maybe they just like had that ingrained in them so much that
They
they were
might have.
like,
This has been like several years now,
pause.
Okay.
but like I took, it was like 2 minutes or something of like content, and just by taking out those pauses that they did, it was like 50 seconds
Wow.
or
Yeah.
something. So it's
That's
like
substantial.
doing these like little edits like add up over time,
Yeah.
even getting another like 2 minutes of content back from taking those out is another like answer to a interesting question, so
For sure.
for people who might wonder why it is that we might clean up audio like that as editors.
Yeah.
Cool,
Yeah, that's a good
cool.
point.
And speaking of minutes, good segue, Nick. We're getting close to like an hour and a half here. I gotta say, this has been like super interesting. I mean, I find this all fascinating because it's something that I know a lot of work goes into to create something of high quality, and I've never had to do it myself, but it's just interesting to hear all the things that go into this. It's not just the tech, like even just finding the people, finding the right people, and like it's just been kind of really good eye opening. And when people ask you like, hey, what do you do, like, and you're just it's like, yeah, I fix Wi-Fi printers because I'm a programmer, right? I fix my parents' but yeah, no, it's just cool to see like all the stuff that goes into your job, because we've been working together since January, and I know you're always doing all these things. It's just I didn't know to what extent and so on. So I found it super fascinating. So
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, when people ask me, I'm like, I make people talk pretty.
Yeah.
That's my.
What can I say about the internet? I was a front-end developer for a long time. So I'm just like, everything you see that's pretty on the web, that's me.
Yeah. You heard it here. Levi is the CSS of audio. Cool. Well, just wanted to say thanks again, and if you have any links to drop down, I don't know. Well, we have the AMA that went out, but is it cool if we drop your Twitter, or do you have some other places you want people to check you out at, or?
Twitter's fine. Yeah, my handle, or levisharpe.com if you want to listen to anything else I do. I will use this moment to plug an independent project that I do.
Be shameless and plug. Go ahead.
I sound design a narrative fiction podcast called Roommate from Hell, which is kind of like a cartoon for your ears. And the premise is our protagonist moves in with a literal demon from hell. They become friends, and antics ensue. We are working on our second season, which was sort of like thwarted a bit by COVID. So
boo COVID, boo COVID.
But that second season should be coming out, soon. Hopefully.
I'm assume there's not two of these, but making sure roommatefromhell.rip.
Yep. Yeah, that's the website. And then you can find it,
I'm
on
definitely
Apple
gonna check that
Podcasts
out.
ever. And also, like, I posted on my website, levisharpe.com, like a list of like 6 of my favorite episodes. A lot of them are very bite-sized because that first season was sort of like proof of concept, where we were all working on it on our nights and weekends and being like, okay, I wrote like a 5-minute script. Like, let's just like make this and see if people like it.
That's awesome. I'm definitely going to check it out.
Cool.
All right. Well, thanks again, folks, for tuning in. We were here with Levi Sharpe, our senior podcast engineer, producer / he does everything. He makes the noises pretty, as he says.
/ friend.
Yeah. / friend. Good. Cool. Well, thanks everybody, and we'll see you next week. Me and Christina will be back on Monday with our last gratitudes and shoutouts for Hacktoberfest. So if you have any other PRs in, we've got just about a day and a half left, I think, for Hacktoberfest, for anybody who's still interested in that. And we will see you next week, folks. See you later.
Goodbye.